Skid steer equipment has become the #1 workhorse for public works and construction. Manufacturers of skid steer equipment include Bobcat, John Deere, Cat, New Holland, to name a few. With attachments such as trenchers, plows, grapples, buckets and hose, hydraulic breakers and sweepers, and more, their versatility is limitless. The best part of a skid steer is that they are exciting to operate. They stop on a dime, spin in circles, climb, dig, lift, and perform a great variety of other tasks quickly and efficiently. Most models operate similar to a tank, using control levers to lock one side of the drive wheels or track in order to make turns. However, as interesting as they are to operate, there are potential risks to the operator and those around them. Far too many workers and bystanders have been injured, maimed, or killed when operating skid equipment. The primary reason lies with untrained and inexperienced workers who jump on a skid steer and try to operate the equipment that they are unqualified to operate. Use of skid steer equipment can place operators and workers at risk of rollover and runover accidents. Recent studies indicate that some people may not appreciate the hazards of operating or working near skid steer equipment. The skid steer appears to be simple to operate. This is due to an absence of operator training, which can result in accidents. For example, the operator's controls are located between the lift arms, causing operators to enter and exit through the front of the equipment. It is possible to accidentally activate a foot or hand control, causing movement of the equipment and lift arms. Skid steers can be quite bouncy, especially when traveling over various types of terrain. Yes, we know you've seen the cowboy type of operator that can spin and make a skid steer seem to dance. However, uncontrolled bounce can lead to a lack of full control and result in striking an object, workers, or possible rollover. It's critical to become thoroughly familiar with the operating procedures found in the equipment manual. Even then, time should be spent on supervised, hands-on skills assessment prior to being authorized to operate the skid steer. Skid steers have numerous areas on the equipment that can cause injury, so be sure that you're well versed in the operation and use of controls, warning labels, safety equipment, guards, and gauges. Most serious skid steer injuries and deaths are associated with being pinned between the bucket and frame of the equipment or between the lift arms and the frame. Particular attention must be shown when working around these areas and avoid these risks. Carefully check your work site for soil conditions and obstacles that might contribute to instability and tip-over. Safety interlocks and operator-present controls are a vital part of your protection. Bypassing the safety systems places your well-being at risk and may add to your liability should someone else be injured. With this being said, never change, adapt, or make inoperable any part of your equipment, especially the interlock systems, as they're designed for your safety. A skid steer is similar to a forklift. They're workhorses, not racehorses, so avoid high-speed operation, sudden starts and turns, and adjust your speed according to the terrain and working conditions. Operating in the vicinity of overhead power lines is a high-risk activity and electrocution risk. Effort must be made to keep a minimum of 10 feet from any overhead lines. You may not know what a line is carrying. Could be telephone, cable, or electrical power. Extreme care must be taken to ensure the work area has been professionally evaluated to ensure that any underground utilities have been located and rendered safe. Be aware to never allow hitchhikers on skid steer equipment. Never operate a skid steer to transport people. We must be aware that loads and lifting attachments can change the weight distribution of the equipment, and don't forget about the bounce. Never overload a bucket or attachments, or carry a load which could fall. Be sure that the location of all bystanders, and, of course, never lift or carry a load over anyone. Use extra care when handling rocks or other loose materials. Tilting the bucket back with the arms raised can cause material to fall back into the cab. Hard hats and eye protection are in order for these situations. For the best stability, keep the bucket level while raising the arms and load low to the ground during transit. When there is a need to drive uphill, be sure that the heavy end of the skid steer is directed uphill when on an incline to prevent tip-over. Avoid undercutting or digging into high embankments, as the wall can collapse and bury you along with the skid steer. When changing buckets or installing attachments, Make sure all connectors are securely fastened. It's possible that your equipment may not be capable of handling the job that you're performing. If that's the case, stop and get the equipment that will handle the job safely. Never push the limits of safety. About 2/3 of a skid steer's weight is placed on the rear wheels when the bucket is empty. When the bucket is loaded, weight shifts to the front axle. Exceeding the rated operating capacity can make your skid steer excessively front-heavy, reducing stability and handling. Many skid steers have a hydrostatic drive, which means that if the levers are engaged, the skid steer will instantly respond. Thus, you should never try to operate the controls or steering levers while outside of the cab. While experienced drivers can almost instinctively operate a skid steer, it is very easy for a beginner to become confused or work outside their experience or comfort level. The best thing to do if this happens is to completely let go of the controls. When the pressure on the controls is released, all of the machine's functions should stop. Be extra cautious of the quick connect systems often used for accessories. Be sure they're in good condition and secure prior to using the equipment. This will help prevent a shower in hot hydraulic fluid. To avoid slips and falls, always keep the foot controls and the operator's compartment free of mud, ice, snow, grease, and debris. The same goes for all walking and working surfaces as well. Enter the cab only when the bucket or other attachments are flat on the ground or when lift arm safety supports are in place. When entering the equipment, face the seat and maintain a 3-point contact with the handholds and step as you enter the operator's compartment. Again, never use foot or hand controls as steps or handholds, as you may cause accidental activation or movement of the equipment. Before leaving the operator's seat, lower the bucket or other attachment flat to the ground, set the parking brake, and turn off the engine. Many job sites have uneven or soft ground, so avoid jumping off the equipment. You may just save yourself a bad ankle or knee injury. In case of an emergency and you're unable to exit through the front of the machine, use the emergency exit through the roof or across the back. It's very important to inspect your equipment on a regular basis. The rule here is pretty simple. Always follow the manufacturer's instructions for maintaining your skid steer. The key is to perform maintenance and inspection checks. Before beginning work on your skid steer, take the time to do a walk-around inspection and check for anything that may create a hazard during operation. Check all vital fluids, belts, and any other recommended service items listed in the equipment manual. When fueling your equipment, use care to avoid spills and the potential for fire. Before servicing the equipment, set the parking brake, lower the bucket or attachment to the ground, turn off the engine, and remove the key from the ignition. If the machine can't be serviced with the bucket on the ground, always use the lift arm supports provided by the manufacturer. If your equipment is not equipped with lift arm supports, contact the dealer or manufacturer's representatives for help in selecting the proper supports. Never use concrete blocks or wood as supports, as they can break under a load. Never work on your skid steer with the engine running unless recommended to do so in the operator's manual. Always follow the manufacturer's safety recommendations to complete the task. Guards and shields are to protect you, so don't fail to replace them after completing repairs or service. Interlock controls must be regularly inspected and maintained in order to ensure proper operating conditions. Never attempt to bypass or defeat interlock controls. Your life may depend on it. Nothing is more important than a high level of operator training. It's vital to be trained in the technical aspects and actual use of the equipment and attachments. Training must include the risks and hazards of the skid steer and attachments, a thorough review of the equipment, service manuals, and warning labels. Even if you've operated a skid steer for another employer, the equipment may not be the same. Therefore, under OSHA training requirements, you must be trained in the actual equipment you'll be using. Employees who may be working around the equipment on the job site must also be educated about the skid steer and possible risks. For help with more specific training, contact your equipment manufacturer for access to any manuals, instructional videos, and operator training courses. Actually, it's not difficult to work safely with skid steer equipment. However, it does require some commitment on the part of the operator and supervision. If you're a supervisor, make sure that your skid steer operators are trained and understand all manufacturers' warnings and instructions before they operate skid steer equipment. Be sure operators are trained in the following safe operating procedures. Only operate equipment from the operator's compartment, never from the outside. Be sure to stay seated with the seat belt fastened and the restraint bar in place. Similar to roller coaster instructions, keep your arms, legs, and head inside the cab at all times. When possible, perform your work on level ground and for maximum stability. When traveling and turning, do so with the bucket in the lowest position possible and, of course, never exceed the manufacturer's recommended load capacity for the equipment. Refer to the skid steer manual for any data plates or labels listing the capacities. Avoid traveling across slopes. Travel straight up or down with the heavy end of the machine pointing uphill. Keep bystanders away from the work area, and above all, never modify or bypass any safety devices. Remember, the key to operating safely is training. Operators must be fully trained and competent on the equipment they will be using. When traveling, it's important to keep the bucket low to the ground for maximum stability. Remember, when the equipment arms are raised, the stability of the skid steer decreases. Rough terrain and steep slopes should always be avoided to reduce the chance of getting stuck or rolling over. When traveling on inclines, always move up and down and never across the face of an angle. Avoid sudden stops, starts, or turns. Operate controls smoothly. Don't jerk the steering levers and raise loads slowly and at an even rate. And be ready to lower the arm if the machine becomes unstable. Remember, an empty bucket means more weight on the back, while a full bucket or other load means more weight in the front. Always try to avoid obstacles by driving around them rather than through them. Due to the bounce factor, it's not recommended to travel long distances on roads and other surfaces. Consider towing whenever possible. When picking up material, drive carefully and then tilt the bucket or attachment and then back away carefully with the load. Next, lower with the arms and drive slowly to the location you wish to unload. Keep the bucket level while you slowly raise the arms. If the skid steer starts to become unstable, then quickly lower the arms to regain stability. When it's safe, go ahead and tilt the bucket or load to place the material or object where you want it. When transporting the equipment on a trailer, be sure that extra care has been taken to secure the skid steer with appropriate load binders. Remember, binders can be a hazard in themselves. Use only ratchet-style binders and be careful to avoid hand traps. Prior to driving off, double-check the trailer to ensure that the brake system is operational and the trailer is properly secured to the hitch with a safety chain. The last thing you want to see is your trailer and skid steer pass you on the freeway. Don't forget, be sure to secure all attachments to the trailer so they don't bounce out during transit. Most serious injuries and deaths involving skid steer equipment are traced to a lack of training, defeating safeguards, and other safety systems. This suggests that workers may not fully appreciate the hazards associated with operating or working near skid steer equipment. Always follow safe work procedures, or there are consequences of bypassing the safety features. In the 1980s, skid steer manufacturers started outfitting skid steers with interlock control systems to prevent workers from unintentionally activating equipment controls. Generally, interlock controls require that equipment such as a seat belt and/or restraint bar be secured before operation controls can function. Some people may think safety features such as interlocks and seat belts are hassles and slow down the job. Nothing could be further from the truth. Bypassing these devices can result in great bodily harm or even death. The consequences of an accident greatly outweigh any false issues relating to productivity. Skid steers must be equipped with rollover protection to include side screens and seat belts to protect the operator. In the event of a rollover, the seat belt keeps the operator within the protective envelope of the rollover protection and prevents the operator from being tossed out into the operating zone of the lift arm. We all know the potential for skid steer equipment to bounce and tip. Side screens also help keep the operator from getting crushed between moving lift arms or falling out of the side or back of the equipment. If your equipment is missing side screens, interlocks, rollover protection, seat belts, or other safety equipment, contact your supervisor to have the skid steer retrofitted as necessary. The equipment dealer or manufacturer's representatives will have all the necessary information to make the equipment compliant. Yes, skid steer equipment has a high value on the worksite, but as we discussed, they can also be dangerous to operate. So take every precaution. Learn all you can about your equipment. And above all, follow your organization's procedures and training for safe skid steer operations.